We finally escaped the Matrix and we're here in a new universe, exploring the weirdest Japanese movies ever made.
Oh dear, I seem to have spotted a cunt. Good day. No! God, please, no!
I think this might actually be my first video on a Japanese movie in general, which is kind of weird because I do watch a decent amount of animes, I think, across all the different years. I even studied a little bit of post-war Japanese cinema when I was back at film school. Weirdly enough, the Japanese industry isn't really well marketed here, and especially if it's not an anime that is related to like some big names like Makoto Shinkai or like Miyazaki. And I feel like this is definitely one of those movies because Junkhead, so the movie that I'm talking about today, is a weird Japanese stop-motion animated film that actually came out in 2017. It premiered at the Fantasia Festival, and I don't know whether it struggled to find like European distributors or anything like it. That's my opinion because it seems to be like the only reason why it wouldn't be able to gather a lot of attention, because it came out last year in Japan and it was screened only on 11 screens across the entire country. It gathered quite a lot of positive reviews and it's already considered like a cult classic. Technically, it took only 1 year to arrive here in Europe, even though the director Takehide Ore has been working on it for maybe the last 10 years. There's a lot of interesting things to say about this film here, but I mainly wanted to talk about it mostly because if you try to Google it, if you try to search for it on YouTube, almost like no one has talked about it. I mean, here in France, for example, I've seen my fair share of videos on it because it just released like a couple of weeks ago. But when it comes to American reviewers, when it comes to British reviewers, or even Australian or any other country, to be honest, I haven't seen a single video talking about this film here. Maybe it hasn't been distributed over there yet, or maybe it went straight to streaming or straight to DVD, so it hasn't gathered like a lot of attention yet. So that's why I was like, I need to jump to that occasion because this is like a weird stop motion gem and I love stop motion film. That's exactly why I put Wallace and Gromit behind me, and I think I've definitely talked about Coraline and maybe even the Lego Movie in some past videos. I love stop motion animation mostly because it's one of those art forms that really requires so much passion.
Hey, hey, hey. I got a gun, no girls got it. I wake up with no Julio, I can, baby, get you and your put this simpleness. Just jump in the car.
Junkhead, for example, it took 7 years to be completed, and the director worked on the first 30 minutes only by himself, and that took him 4 years, which is insane. And this film here is kind of like one of the most perfect examples of auteur cinema, meaning that we've got a director here who's worked on every single aspect of this film, and even in the last few years the team working on this film was incredibly small. He didn't only work as a director, as a screenwriter, but also he did work on the voices, so he voiced so many of the different characters in this film. He sculpted so many different puppets, worked on the lighting, all the camera operating, the editing, the composition of the music itself. Almost everything was done by Takehide Ore. These are the kind of movies that make me go, wow, there is so much passion, there is so much love into the art of filmmaking. It's not only big budget Hollywood movies, it's not only those kind of red notice Netflix movies that put like a lot of stars and a cheap mediocre script to attract a lot of viewers. There is also people who like want to commit to their vision so much that they spend years and years and years working on it, and this film is the perfect example of that.
キャラクターが動き出す不思議な感覚ですよね。なんか自分が新しい命を生み出したっていうの神になった感覚。キャラクターが動き出す不思議な感覚ですよね。なんか
For example, the director started working on this film when he was in his 40s. The film takes around 140,000 shots, which for a stop motion animation film is kind of insane. But at the same time, if you look at other ones like Coraline and even the Lego Movie, you might say, well, this is kind of like the standard for most stop motion animated films, but it's not really the case, because when we're talking about Junkhead specifically, there is such minimal special effects that you would be shocked. When it comes to the story of this film here, it's set in a distant future world where humans have received longevity but lost their fertility and are nearly extinct by population decline. The protagonist, a cyborg explorer, enters an underground world where artificially created species live. His mission is intended to research for the secrets of reproductivity, and as the story goes on, it becomes gradually clear that the underground world is kind of a dystopia where dangerous monsters roam or ambush, and the artificially created intelligent species developed a unique society. When I went to see this movie at the cinema, I had no idea what the fuck I was getting into, because it's incredibly weird. If you know Japanese animation, if you know Japanese horror specifically, it tends to be incredibly weird and it tends to be quite gory and grotesque. The monsters in this film here, for example, have some kind of H.R. Giger look. It really reminded me of the Xenomorph in the Alien franchises, but kind of like a more simplistic version, of course. And the animation itself is very close to what we get in Wallace and Gromit, so the characters themselves feel kind of organic. Everything feels very organic at the end of the day. It's kind of like interesting how the sets and all the different landscapes look incredibly dirty, disgusting, abandoned, as if no one was supposed to be living there and just these people like had to adapt in order to live there. And then we've got the characters who look like mutated, weird pieces of like gum. It's incredibly weird when it comes to the character designs, and there are so many different types of characters. For example, like the female characters, which are engineers, if I'm not mistaken, they are the ones which attract the most amount of attention when it comes to the film itself, because they are quite bigger than their male versions, and they are red with huge breasts, incredibly defined abs, and they tend to be like quite an authoritative figure within the society that is built underground. It's hard to explain, but when you see it, you're just like, that is some classic weird Japanese shit. Like, it almost feels like you've entered weird sex club, you know? But nothing is really sexualized at the end of the day, because these people are so incredibly weird looking that at the end of the day, it's not like a Cronenberg film. This film is kind of like a mix in between WALL-E and The Matrix, in a way that it's kind of throwing our main character into so many different situations and so many different bodies, as he loses all concepts of memory and identity and has to relearn everything from the start to go through his mission. But at the same time, it's quite violent, like a horror movie. So that's why I'm pretty sure that this animated movie is not for children at all. This is 100% adult animation. I didn't really give it like a perfect score, mostly because the ending of this film could leave a lot of people feeling unsatisfied, because it kind of feels like a cliffhanger. And after researching the film, I kind of understand why, because the director has conceived this film here as a trilogy. So there are 2 more films coming that will complete the story and the journey of a character. But at the end of the day, there are so many incredible things happening in this film here, from an existential level to a just visual and an action level. There are so many really cool action sequences, which is saying a lot when it comes to stop motion animated films, because action sequences are kind of like the hardest thing to conceive. and I'm gonna be addressing how he did it like later on in the video. By the way, we're gonna go through a couple of interesting production secrets. Something that I really enjoyed and I was not expecting at all is that this film is almost kind of silent in a way that the language that all of these weird creatures speak, it's like mumbo jumbo. Like there is no way you can understand what the hell is going on. Sometimes it feels like it's a mix in between like Japanese and European languages. It kind of reminded me of JoJo in the way that some of the characters have like weirdly European or Italian names.
C is for U is for N is for T is for
トレビアンだよ、トレビアン。
Kanto.
I have no idea why Japanese directors do that. I really have to look it up because it's incredibly funny. But like to hear all of these characters like talk to each other, making weird sounds and then saying like, Julian, come here. Stuff like that is just really weird. And it's another aspect that is definitely defined to create a bit of sense of humor, because otherwise this film could have been quite nihilistic and dark. So before I was saying that this is part of a trilogy, right? So the first movie is called Junkhead and it's taking place in 3385. The next that is gonna come out is a prequel called The Junk World, which is taking place in 2343. And then the final chapter, which is called Junk Ends, and which will be taking place in 3440. And it kind of makes sense because like we've got humans here which almost never die. Within the film itself, we've got the conscience of this human which is being transferred in robot bodies. So it makes sense that we will be having these kind of gaps of time, and it kind of allows us to experiment and see a lot of different things. Well, if you think about it, very often when it comes to film franchises, well, the jumps in time very often they're not that important. Whew. And for example, that's why I like Isaac Asimov's Foundation series, because in between each and every book there are so many different thousands of years passing, and it kind of allows for new themes and new landscapes to be explored, which is something really cool. And I really hope that he manages to make his 2 next films, especially because I would want to see how this story ends, and I hope that it doesn't take him like 20 more years to finish it, because that would be quite sad. I hope actually that this film and this video here convinces you to go and seek it out and to support this kind of weird filmmaking. For example, when I was looking into other movies, I wanted to mention like a couple of anecdotes just to give you an idea of how hard it is to work on these stop motion animated films. When it comes to Coraline, for example, the costume designer Deborah Cook, just to create the iconic raincoat that Coraline is wearing across the entire film, it required wires and weights underneath it so that it could look realistic on screen. And basically she explained that if you think of something that it's the height of a pencil, which is the height of one of our characters, even the thinnest fabric won't look like it has the right weight and gravity, so you need to make it super heavy on the bottom of the hem so it looks right for the scale. And imagine these kind of small details, and then you actually have to move these puppets and these characters to create some action sequences. And even with 29 full-time animators that they had for that film there, only like 90/100 seconds of footage were able to be made in a week of time. If you want another interesting fact when it comes to modern filmmaking for stop motion animated features, when it comes to Coraline, they developed groundbreaking 3D printing techniques which basically allowed to have as many facial expressions as possible within the film itself. And this basically allowed them to create more than 6,000 faces for the movie's characters, ranging from very broad expressions to really subtle ones. And at the end of the day, all the different characters in Coraline had approximately 207,000 different facial expressions available, which is kind of insane. I'm talking about this mostly because when you compare it to Junkhead, for example, and when you look at the different puppets, the director said something quite interesting, and the fact that while he was studying a lot of different films to literally learn how to do this, because it's not someone who went to film school, it's not someone who has any kind of degree when it comes to filmmaking. So what he did is just watch so many different films, take notes, and try to imagine how he would do things differently. And when it comes to stop motion animated films, something that he noticed is that very often the eyes tend to be not that expressive, which at the end of the day forces our characters to look like dolls and kind of creepy. So something that he did, for example, was just remove the eyes. So he just removed them and covered them up with different tools, and it's just such a clever way to solve a problem that is created by that kind of filmmaking. Something that he wanted to do as well, he wanted to shoot in 24 frames per second instead of 12, because very often stop motion animated films are shot in 12 frames per second, and that is to give it a bit more of a realistic look. And that's also why the film itself, when it comes to the camera work, looks very dynamic, and it's kind of closer to the editing that you would see in anime movies instead of the editing that we're used to see in stop motion films like the Laika films like Kubo and the Two Strings, or even like Wallace and Gromit. The director himself, after studying art and becoming a painter, he decided that he wouldn't be a good painter at the end of the day, so he specialized in interior design, and that's probably where he gathered most of his knowledge when it comes to creating really complex set design that then he would use for his films. Around that time, when he was 40, he developed really a huge addiction to film and cinema and filmmaking, watching around like 10 movies a day, and as I said before, taking notes and learning as much as possible from them. This film here didn't really start from a script, but it started from a drawing board, because the director Hori is a real visual artist, meaning that for him the most important thing is the visuals, next come the characters, and at the very end the story itself. And it really shows when it comes to this film here. It really proves why I enjoy this movie so much, because at the end of the day I really hate it when films rely too much on stories, rely too much on themes, and don't really try to revolutionize anything when it comes to the camera work, when it comes to the cinematography, when it comes to the color palette and the different types of lighting. Those are the things that really attract me as well. I really started sympathizing with the director because he kind of describes himself as a really lonely person, and also a person who doesn't really want to ask for help, and that's mainly why he started this journey in the stop motion world by himself. And he was actually inspired by Makoto Shinkai, who also worked on his first few short films and films by himself. Plus, he didn't know anyone in the film industry, so he decided to do everything on his own, which is incredibly inspiring at the end of the day, because it really shows that people who do that at the end of the day can actually create something beautiful, and they don't end up on YouTube like me.
They ask you how you are, and you just have to say that you're fine when you're not really fine, but you just can't get into it because they would never understand.
Before I was talking about action sequences and fights, right? Basically how he did it is that he choreographed the fights using his own body and kind of rehearsing all the different movements, and then he tried to recreate all of those movements with his puppets. And that's why the action sequences actually worked out so well, and that's why they look so incredibly interesting, without even mentioning the sound design, which is so cool.
鮭の酢味噌ス OK 言うとる
I want to end this video with a quote from the director himself in an interview I had translated from French, because I haven't been able to find any English interviews of the director himself, and everything else is in Japanese, so it was so hard to find all of this different information on the director. So the director in this interview said that basically the story of the main character is also a bit of mine, someone normal sent on a mission to the center of the earth. Although he doesn't have the necessary skill, he does not give up, and he's determined to finish this mission, which is exactly what Hori did at the end of the day, and managed to create something quite beautiful that I hope that you will give a chance and go to the cinema or seek it out in any other way. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I finally lost my Japanese virginity, which is such a weird sentence and I have no idea why I said it, but there, it's on the internet. I lost my Japanese virginity today on YouTube. As As I said before, don't forget to like and subscribe. Every single like that you drop will go to the director himself. I want to show him the support that he needs to keep going with the second and the third film in the trilogy, because I think that these are the kind of movies that I want to see more. If I have to sit in front of yet another drama of two people who hate each other but for some kind of reason they don't want to break up, I will literally shoot myself in the head. I'd rather watch this weird dude make puppets move. Okay? There. We figured it out. We saved cinema. I'm Patrick, and this is Torn Apart.